Here with me now, Sinan Aral, director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, one of the authors of the new study out today about the cost of the uncoordinated responses to coronavirus. And I want, Sinan, if you could just sort of take us through the idea here as represented in this influence pinwheel, the idea that people's behavior is really the key thing here, right? Voting with your feet as much as policy, but that other states' policy impact people across their borders because of social networks.
So that's exactly right. The idea of the paper, Chris, is quite simple. One state or county's policies significantly affect mobility in other states and counties, and not just in geographically proximate states, but often at great distances through behavioral influence over social media, but not just social media. We call people from state to state. We stay connected. And now that we're all sheltered in, we're online a lot more. We're talking how we talk about the virus, and the policies that a certain state is implementing is affecting people all over the country.
It's so funny because when I read this study, I had a glimpse of personal recognition of being on Instagram or something and seeing like a friend who has a barbecue and being like, huh, interesting. They're having a barbecue. I don't think of a barbecue. Like it definitely like puts the thought in your head of like, what's the realm of the possible activity?
Well, it's funny because as we were writing this study, and we worked really hard around the clock to get it out because we think it's so important, my mind went to Kara Swisher, who wrote an article in the New York Times about how she had to convince her mother in Florida. She had to call her from New York to keep her inside, given what she was hearing from the governor of Florida, but also from the news outlets. And so that's a perfect example of influence at a distance. And the main message of this paper is that we're all in it together. This is an interdependent phenomenon, and we need to approach it as an interdependent phenomenon.
So the key point here is like, right, that this sort of experiment in federalism that we're doing right now, which we've done both on the front end and are now doing on sort of the back end of reopening, which is you states figure it out. There are actual uniform guidelines from the CDC, but basically the president's telling people to ignore them. Your point is that, like, it's not really going to work insofar as you can't contain behavior. You certainly can't contain actual people, but you can't even contain the behavioral influence from one state to the other, which is why you actually need some coordinated federal response.
Well, in essence, what we try to say is that governments across regions need to coordinate with each other with or without national guidance. So we provide and we don't believe that a one-size-fits-all policy is necessarily correct. Different regions may need different policies, but they need to be coordinated with one another. So let me give you some examples. In the paper, we provide governors maps, those pinwheels that you described, to coordinate in the absence of national guidance. And these maps show each state. We have one for each of 50 states. They show each state which other states are affecting them the most. And there are some things that are intuitive and some things that are not intuitive. So, for instance, Georgia is mostly influenced by neighboring states through travel. And when Georgia reopened, University of Maryland estimated that about 500,000 people came into Georgia from neighboring states to patronize bars, restaurants, barbershops that were closed in their own states. From North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama. It was about a 13% increase in travel into the state, and it was about 62,000 new visitors from out of state every day when Georgia first opened. And so that is an example of geographic spillovers. But there are also these social spillovers at a distance. So when you look at the map of Florida, what you notice is that the state that influences Florida the most is New York. And that is maybe partly because of travel at the beginning of the pandemic, but also significantly because of social influence over social media, Zoom, phone calls, and so on. And what we are recommending is that states use these maps as a guideline for which other states, which governors should we call, to stay abreast of policy, to coordinate policy, to have weekly conversations about how a policy in one state is changing, how it may affect outcomes in other states, and how those actions of policymakers can be coordinated.
And this just final question here. I mean, you talk about sort of, across the border mobility, right? So, I can go to a bar a 20-minute drive away. It's across a state line, or I can go get a haircut. Or I can go to a mall. Right now, air travel is extremely low in this country, coming up a little bit from where it was at the absolute trough. But this isn't even talking about, the universe in which we start to see air travel get back up to normal. We already know that people from New York seeded outbreaks a lot of places. Once we have air travel going back up, then you've got a situation where, now we've got interregional mobility. Everything is national at that point. Like right now, we've got a weird situation where because of so little air travel, it all is pretty regional in terms of the actual physical transmission. But that's not going to last that long if air travel goes back up.
That's right. Travel spillovers will increase once air travel resumes to increasing rates and maybe even normal rates. Right now, everyone's sheltered in, so everyone is online. The largest influences are social at the present moment in the data that we analyzed. There is a silver lining, though. When we analyzed the model based on our data, we found that states had to compensate for each other, but that they also benefit from spillovers. What I mean is that a state that has a certain immobility target, if their peer states are loosening up and that influences the citizens of that state to move around more, then that state will have to impose more costly and more restrictive measures to meet their targets. But if the states coordinate, the spillovers actually help them achieve their targets more effectively because it gives them free treatments in a sense, because the states neighboring are helping the focal state achieve their mobility targets by being responsible themselves. So the moral of the story is, if we are uncoordinated, not one size fits all, but coordinated, if we're uncoordinated, it dramatically increases the costs and the risk. If we're coordinated, we can actually harness the spillovers to help us defeat the pandemic.
All right. Fascinating study. I learned a lot from it. Helped me think through all this. Sinan Aral, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.